Peter, thanks so much for taking a few minutes to talk to me today, and congratulations on your role as incoming board president for the Heart Association in the Twin Cities.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm really looking forward to working with the American Heart Association over the next few years.
Well, we thought we'd just take a few minutes to let everybody get introduced to you by talking about some of your priorities coming in with the AHA. Is that okay?
Absolutely. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, one of the things that you've mentioned was optimizing care delivery. What do you mean by that?
Well, there's a lot that we know about best practices and how to take better care of people. But one of the challenges that we run into in medicine is essentially executing on what we already know. There are a number of treatments that are available for specific conditions, and making sure that we're offering the best available treatment to all patients at all times sometimes can be a challenge. And so I think sometimes people refer to it as implementation research, or working to implement what we already know in everyday care and make sure that the latest developments and latest discoveries are being made available to all patients.
That's great. Here in the Twin Cities, we work on a lot of prevention initiatives around blood pressure and cholesterol and type 2 diabetes as they relate to heart disease. But you specifically mentioned Get With the Guidelines and the way that those programs play out. Can you say a little bit about that?
Yeah, the Get With the Guidelines is a program that the American Heart Association has had for several years that is designed in part to help centers and programs make sure that they're providing best practice care and helping do some analysis of, on a population basis, the care that they are providing as an individual center. And I think what's also important, and another focus of the American Heart Association, is working on not just caring for people who already have heart disease, but caring for those that are at risk to develop it in the future. And hypertension and diabetes are a couple of the very common conditions that are significantly associated with a risk of developing more significant heart and vascular disease, heart attacks, strokes, death, that sort of thing. And so one of the ways that the American Heart Association is partnering with the community is efforts to help make people aware of the importance of treating their blood pressure, and also other public health measures like supporting initiatives to try to reduce the use of tobacco products.
That's really great. And you mentioned hypertension. That's been a big signature strategy for us in the Twin Cities. And we've dug into particular pockets of populations and communities that are in hypertension crisis. We've really focused on the Hmong community on the east side of the metro and the Native American community in Minneapolis. And we plan to extend that a little bit this year. Why is that so important? Why is hypertension such a big risk factor?
I think there's a couple of reasons. The first is that in the vast majority of cases, people who have hypertension don't have symptoms. And so they may not know how severe it is, or notice that it's causing damage that happens over a period of years to decades. The second is that it is such an important factor in vascular health, referring to the blood vessels, and that's a lot of what leads to some of the most catastrophic outcomes, as I said, strokes, heart attacks, and death. And so treating high blood pressure is so important because it's also a modifiable risk factor. If you have a strong family history of heart attacks, for example, you can't exactly choose your parents. But if you have high blood pressure, there's almost always something that we can do about it. Most of the medications are relatively inexpensive and well tolerated. So it's something that we have an opportunity to really make a huge impact on a population basis in a way that is hard to do once someone has already had damage from this longstanding condition.
That's really great. We don't plan on letting up anytime soon, and we're excited to have your help in figuring out how we extend that work over the next year or two. And then the final thing you mentioned was our advocacy efforts around tobacco. Advocacy and public policy is a really big part of what the Heart Association does, and we've really invested over the years in our public policy portfolio, and tobacco's been a big part of it. Can you say anything about some of the exciting things happening there?
Well, I think tobacco has been recognized for decades as a huge risk factor, not only for heart and vascular disease, but lung disease and skin cancers, a whole host of problems. And research has clearly shown that efforts to help reduce the risk of people starting to use tobacco products makes a big difference. Restricting access, especially for younger people, is really essential. There's been a lot of initiatives. Historically, Minnesota has been a state that's been relatively more progressive about restricting access to tobacco and highlighting the public health risks of it. And it's something that the American Heart Association has been involved with on an advocacy front that I think is still important for us to remain focused and continue to work to reduce the risk of tobacco-related disease.
That's really important. We've seen almost a 17 years in a row decline of youth smoking rates, and then just in the recent year or two, an uptick because of the vaping pandemic. And more teens, adolescents, high school kids, middle school kids are trying to vape, and we know how terribly addicting that is. Last year, we were successful statewide in raising the age to purchase vaping and tobacco products from 18 to 21. And this year, we're going to really take a big swing at flavors, trying to restrict more flavors that are out there, because we know the industry is targeting children and communities of color with flavors like menthol and cherry lemonade. So that's going to be one of our big advocacy pushes this year. So again, we have no intention of letting up on those advocacy efforts.
And I think what's important about that too is there's often this concept that vaping is a safer version of smoking or less dangerous. And I think that the nicotine is still incredibly addictive. I had, at least at some point, a lecture in medical school where it was highlighted that it can be as addictive or more so than heroin. But I think also really the fact that the flavors are designed and really targeting some of the most vulnerable folks in the population, because if you can get kids hooked, you've got someone to buy your product for life. And so anything we can do to reduce use of tobacco, especially in the youth, I think will have public health benefits for decades to come.
That's right. Well, thanks so much for taking a few minutes with us today and talking about these big issues that you're interested in helping us with. And once again, congrats for being the incoming board president for the Twin Cities American Heart Association.
Thanks so much. I appreciate the chance to chat with you today.
Have a great day.
Thanks, you too.